Alright guys, here we go with the video. It is a CRJ-900 which crash landed in Toronto. The video is kind of the low quality, but anyways, we have it, so let me show it to you.
Oh fuck! Oh fuck! Oh no 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 no!
Well, luckily everyone survived that dramatic crash together, crew and passengers. But let's analyze the possible cause of this accident. But at first let's see other videos presented. So this is the airplane. It is on approach, final approach and landing. As you can see, it hit the ground and immediately one of the wings disassembled and burst into flames. Passengers filming this video during their evacuation from the airplane. As you can see, the airplane is inverted, it's upside down. All of the landing gears are absent, and I guess this wing too. They're just walking, freezing cold, and some of the passengers forgot their jackets even, but some again took belongings like backpacks, bags, but luckily most passengers didn't take bags with them, which expedites the evacuation process. That's the evacuation from inside. The airplane is inverted. Flight attendants, they do a great job here. Also, some of the passengers help. And the fire brigades, they tried to seize the possible fire. There was the smoke coming from the central part of the fuselage where the air conditioning packs are installed and probably also fuel tanks. And here's the final track of the airplane. It was the approach for runway 23 in Toronto. I would say nothing extraordinary here except of the ground speed. You can see it's kind of low for this airplane type. Usually it should be at least 140-160 knots. But I have a very easy explanation about the low ground speed. Let me tell you it a little later in this video. At first, let's check out the general data about the flight. So it was Endeavor Airlines Canadair CRJ-900 on behalf of Delta Airlines. So it was performing the flight of Delta Airlines in this particular flight. Registration November, performing flight from Minneapolis to Toronto. I hope I spelled this name correctly. There were 76 passengers and 4 crew members on board, kind of the standard composition for this airplane. Landed runway 23, yes, but came to a stop on the runway inverted. Both wings, both main gear and tailplane separated from the airframe. So actually what is left is a fuselage with passengers and crew inside. The most critical component of the aircraft survived. How do we say that if everyone can walk away from the airplane after landing, this landing is not a failure? I'm trying to joke here, but actually one of the passengers was seriously wounded. Yeah, there were no fatalities, however, one person was critically injured, 7 others received minor injuries. For this kind of the accident, then you see airplane just rolling on the runway, then wings, tails separated. The outcome in general, I would say, is quite good. I just wonder about this one person. I hope he or she will be better very soon. The investigation team has already been deployed to the crash site. They will recover a cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. The NTSB is leading the team of the United States investigators, but the main investigation will be done by Canadian authorities because it happened in Canada. However, the jet was performing the flight of the American airline, so American side will also be here presented. And here we have the notice to airmen who plan to operate the flight to or from Toronto. Dry snow 10%, compacted snow 25%, and so on. This report is about the surfaces of the airport, apron, taxiways, and the runway. What we also have is the report about the blowing snow, which is only possible if you have kind of the strong wind. And obviously in this case, runway requires regular cleaning. And some of the snow is even removed by chemicals, just not to let the snow to stay on the runway. And here's the answer why the ground speed of the airplane during the approach phase was kind of low. Basically because of the strong wind with the gusts up to 32 knots. The visibility by the time was 5 stated miles, blowing snow, clouds broken. Well, average, the weather is not that bad, but the wind to 70 degrees, 27 gusts, 35 is kind of strong one. Plus, it's not fully a headwind. You have 40 degrees between your axis, runway axis, and the wind direction. It means that almost half of the wind goes from the side, from the right-hand side. So the airplane approached the runway, and here is its final rest position, right on the runway. Despite at least a single roll on the runway, the airplane remained on the surface. It's good. And let's watch again this video. I want to comment on it. So the airplane is flying here. Everything seems to be normal. The airplane is flying low, but here it seems for me, at least from this camera angle, that the vertical speed of descent increases. It happened over here, just 1 second here, like the airplane is dropping down a little. And there was like no attempt to flare the airplane. Or maybe it was, but it was done very lately. I don't see the deflection of the elevator here. It's really hard to see with this video quality, but probably here I can see the deflection of the elevator. Yeah, it seems like the pilots tried to pull it up at the very last moment. But unfortunately, airplane hadn't enough energy to flare normally, so it continued with the vertical speed right to the runway. And because of that vertical speed, landing gear broke down. From what I see, they had light bang to the right. It's quite logical because you have the wind blowing to the right, and some pilots use this technique to bank a little on landing to touch on one landing gear, I mean main landing gear. But as you can see, this technique has its own downside, since all of the vertical speed, so all of the energy goes to one landing gear, which collapsed immediately, and the airplane continued to roll to the right, touching the ground with the wing. And here we go. The wing here just separated, and the airplane stopped on the runway. Actually, it's good that the wing separated. It continued to burn, but aside from the fuselage. I guess for CRJ you can land with a little bank even though you have a very low wing here. Well, I guess it's still a normal thing for this airplane, but I personally prefer to compensate the crosswind with the crab just a little, and just before landing reduce the crab, so nose to the runway axis, and compensate with the bank, with ailerons, the moment. But it's kind of tricky and requires lots of the precision in piloting. But you know, I got used to it on ATR 72, on Boeing 737, so for me it's not a big issue, let's say. Even in kind of the adverse weather conditions with gust wind, I was able to do it more or less well. Because landing with a bang, it's a little scary for me, because you have the engines underneath on Boeing 737, and here you have kind of the low wing. So if you have this kind of the strong wing, you have to put also the headwind compensation for your approach. Usually it's 1/2 of the headwind component or gusts in full. Like for example, 20 knots, 35 knots, despite the wind direction you take 12 knots and you add this amount to your approach speed. It's just to make sure that you have enough airspeed to control the airplane. And upon flare, you usually bleed this speed down to your usual approach speed and you touch down on that one. Well, really it depends on your aircraft flight manual or flight crew training manual of particular aircraft type. So what do I think happened with that CRJ? Well, I think that is what could happen to this Boeing 737 Classic. I've took this video from the Pete Irish pilot, and let's watch it.
Watch this Air New Zealand 737 trying to land in windy Wellington. The backdrop shows you just what a hoolie is blowing. Bang into the runway, but they were prepared for this. The operating crew press the toga switch, the engine spool up, the power bites, and they climb.
So this Boeing 737 of Air New Zealand experienced so-called wind shear. And as Pete says here, pilots were prepared. That's why they didn't crash to the runway. They performed the go-around, adding the thrust at the proper time. A little late, but at the proper time. Let's watch again. You see how the airplane drops down, how it loses the airspeed. The airspeed for the airplane equals energy, so if you lose it because of the wind shear, which could happen at any altitude, especially close to the ground, you might encounter this situation. Wind shear is the rapid wind direction and or wind speed change with the altitude. It is very dangerous for any sort of the airplane. That's why on the modern airplanes you have even wind shear warnings or predicted wind shear warnings. But sometimes the system may not give you the actual wind shear conditions, and it's up to pilots to understand that they encounter wind shear. How can you define it? Well, if your airspeed is increasing or decreasing, if your vertical speed is dropping down and the normal thrust setting is not enough to maintain your glide profile, well, in that case, you encounter wind shear. What do you need to do? The only solution is to go around. But I agree that very close to the ground, you don't have lots of the time for the quick reaction. That's why you always should expect those kind of the conditions if you land in a strong gusty wind. And here we have the animation that was presented to us by some of the news agency, and they here say about the wind. So it was 18 degrees, they say. However, on METAR we have the different one, and they say that they show that definitely it was one roll of the airplane, and luckily this wing separated. It burst into flames, but the fuselage is okay. And also from what I can see, the runway itself is definitely covered by snow. Well, the snow is not a huge factor, but let me show you, for example, this video showing some of the precipitation. It's the icy cold rain, and there is the approach on runway which is covered by snow. You can see that it's really hard to define the flare distance. You see something, but yeah, it's kind of hard for pilots to define visually the distance to the ground. And in this case, you have to rely also on your radio altimeter and counting 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. It doesn't call 0, and the flare you should perform relative to your airplane type. For example, on Boeing 737, I started the flare usually at 30 feet, but on ATR 72, 20 feet is okay. So yeah, the weather obviously played a great role in this accident. But also I think the human factor too, because pilots should analyze that stuff. They should be aware of the blowing snow, precipitation that could reduce visibility and the perception of the ground, and they should count that there is a strong gusty wind, so they should maintain higher speed on approach and also expect a wind shear. And let me show you this old video of MD-80 and how it landed really hard, so the tail separated, and it all happened because of the low airspeed. There was not enough energy to flare the airplane properly. As far as I remember, here it was a test flight. Yeah, in this case pilots are alive, so they may tell their part of the story. And also we have cockpit voice recorder plus flight data recorder. Everything will be analyzed. But what I see, and it's clear for me that this airplane hadn't enough energy to flare normally. If pilots tried to land it normally, but I think there was the deflection of elevators in this case. So yeah guys, one more air crash, which makes the last couple of months kind of terrible for commercial aviation. But luckily, at least here we have a good outcome, not for airplane, but for everyone inside. They're alive, and it's the main thing. So guys, safe flights to you, and see you around.